The subterranean archive beneath the luxury hotel smelled of old parchment, copper, and rain. Amara's soft footfalls echoed across the polished obsidian floor as she navigated the maze of glass display cases. She had stayed late to catalogue a series of late Joseon dynasty ledgers, completely unaware that the vault's heavy steel door had quietly sealed shut behind her. Then she heard it, a ragged, choked breath cutting through the dead silence. Amara turned the corner and froze. Pinned against the edge of a mahogany desk sat Kang Tae-jun, the pristine, untouchable titan of Seoul's corporate and criminal shadow world, was completely undone. His charcoal suit jacket lay discarded on the floor. His crisp white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, stained with dark smears of blood. Rain lashes rattled against the reinforced glass high above, casting moody, flickering shadows across his sharp features. A deep cut split his cheekbone, a lingering mark from an ambush his security team had spent the evening desperately trying to cover up. He was trembling, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of a life built on solitude and absolute control. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew the rule. Every staff member had the non-contact policy drilled into their heads on day one. Never touch Kang Tae-jun. To touch him was to invite immediate termination. Or worse. But looking at the terrifyingly powerful man unraveling in the dark, she didn't see a billionaire or a mob boss. She saw someone bleeding out in total isolation. Instead of backing away, Amara stepped closer. Tae-jun's dark, razor-sharp eyes snapped to hers, wild and dangerous. "Leave," he rasped, his voice a low, gravelly warning that usually made grown men drop to their knees. Amara ignored it. Closing the remaining distance, she reached out. Her warm hand hovered in the cool air for a fraction of a second before her fingertips gently pressed against his bruised, cut jawline. Tae-jun went dead rigid. His pulse hammered visibly against her skin, a trapped animal bracing for impact. The air in the room felt thick enough to suffocate them both. Amara held her breath, fully expecting his hand to wrap around her wrist and break it, or for his guards to storm the vault and drag her out. Instead, the tightly wound muscle in his jaw yielded. Tae-jun let out a shuddering breath that broke the quiet like shattering glass. His eyes fluttered shut. Slowly, helplessly, he leaned his heavy face directly into her palm, seeking the heat of her touch, like a dying man stumbling onto water. His knuckles turned stark white as he gripped the desk edge, fighting the sheer shock of human warmth. He turned his head slightly, his warm breath fanning across her wrist. When he spoke, the ice in his voice was completely gone, replaced by a raw, desperate whisper. "Please, don't stop." The morning light flooded the 78th floor of the Tae-jun Tower with brutal clinical clarity. The heavy atmosphere of the subterranean vault from the night before felt like a fever dream, but the lingering warmth against Amara's palm was impossibly real. She straightened her blazer, preparing herself for the inevitable security escort out of the building. She had broken the cardinal rule. She had touched the untouchable. Instead, she was escorted directly into Kang Tae-jun's private top-floor residence, a glass sanctuary suspended above the smog and skyline of Seoul. Tae-jun stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, backlit by the pale dawn. He was pristine. His tailored black suit was immaculate, his dark hair swept back with surgical precision. The angry slash across his cheekbone was covered by a flesh-colored bandage, the only physical proof of the violent ambush he had survived hours prior. He didn't look wounded anymore. He looked like an unyielding marble statue carved from pure power and distance. "Miss Williams," his voice cut through the vast room. Flat and completely stripped, of the desperation that had undone him in the dark. He didn't turn around immediately. "Mr. Kang," Amara replied, keeping her posture steady, despite the heavy, suffocating weight of his presence. When he finally turned, his gaze was ice. The dark, razor-sharp eyes that had shut in surrender beneath her touch now locked onto hers with calculated indifference. "Effective immediately, your work with the hotel's archival collection is reassigned. You will no longer operate in the public lower levels." Amara raised an eyebrow, refusing to let her voice falter. "Are you firing me?" "No," Taejun said smoothly, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. The air between them instantly tightened, thick with a dangerous, unspoken electric charge. He stopped just past the threshold of personal space, close enough for her to catch the clean scent of cedar and expensive cologne, but far enough that no skin could possibly meet. "You are being moved to my private workspace here in the residence. The rare manuscripts in my personal vault require your immediate attention." "Your private residence?" She met his gaze head-on, unbothered by his intimidating frame. "I thought the rule was absolute separation, Mr. Kang. Working in your personal space seems counterproductive to your boundaries." A quiet, dangerous stillness settled over Taejun. His jaw flexed, a faint, betraying flicker of heat breaking through his icy composure, before he expertly slammed the wall back up. "The security protocols here are absolute," he said, his voice dropping an octave, rich with subtext that contradicted every rigid word he uttered. "You will be under constant supervision. You will perform your duties, and you will not step out of your designated area." He was drawing a line in the sand. He was rebuilding the glass border between them, asserting control the only way he knew how. Yet as he walked past her, his shoulder brushing so close to hers that the fabric of his jacket whispered against her sleeve, Amara knew the truth. He wasn't keeping her close to watch her. He was keeping her close because he couldn't bear to let her go. The private archive room inside Taejun's glass residence had become an intoxicating battleground of unspoken tension. Amara sat at the massive oak work table, delicately translating a 17th century ledger, when the heavy timber doors clicked open for the third time that morning. Taejun entered, holding a leather-bound file that had no logical connection to her restoration work. He didn't speak immediately. He simply crossed the room with his long, measured stride, stopping just at the edge of her table. He leaned over slightly, ostensibly to review a digitized index on her screen, bringing his towering frame so close she could feel the subtle heat radiating off his wool suit. "The cipher on this page," Taejun murmured, his low voice brushing against the shell of her ear. "Ensure the translation is exact." "It already is, Mr. Kang," Amara said smoothly, turning her face to look up at him. They were barely inches apart. She didn't flinch or pull away. She simply met his intense, dark gaze with calm amusement. "This is the third time you've checked on this specific line today." Taejun's eyes darkened, a flash of heat breaking through his impenetrable mask, before he straightened his spine, adjusting his cuffs with practiced precision. Accuracy is paramount. It was a blatant excuse, and they both knew it. For a man who used to run a multi-billion-dollar empire and Seoul's most ruthless shadow, syndicate with robotic efficiency, his suddenly fragmented routine was sending shockwaves through his organization. Outside the archive's glass walls, his senior executive team stood in the sprawling hallway, exchanging nervous, bewildered glances. Taejun had postponed 2 critical international board calls simply to review mundane archival logs. Through the clear panel, Amara saw his chief security officer, Min-jae, hover hesitantly near the doorway. The man looked pale, holding an encrypted tablet meant for an urgent briefing on the recent ambush. Normally, Taejun would have demanded the intel instantly. Now he kept his back turned to his second-in-command, entirely consumed by the quiet space he shared with Amara. "Sir," Minjai finally ventured, his voice tight as he stepped across the threshold. "The board is waiting in the main conference suite. They need your sign-off on the logistics strategy." Taejun didn't even turn his head. His focus remained locked entirely on Amara, his gaze tracing the delicate slope of her jaw, lingering on the memory of where her fingers had touched his skin. "Tell them to wait," Taejun said, his tone flat and unyielding. Minjae blinked, visibly stunned by the unprecedented delay. "Sir, the board members have been waiting for over an hour." "I said," Taejun cut him off, a sharp, dangerous edge slipping into his voice as he finally turned a frosty glare onto his lieutenant. "They will wait." Minjai bowed quickly, backed out of the room, and closed the doors. Silence descended once more, heavy and charged. Amara offered Taejun a knowing, faint smile, leaning back in her chair. "You're slipping, Mr. Kang." Taejun looked down at her, his jaw flexing tight. He didn't touch her, but the sheer gravity of his presence pulled every bit of air from the room. "I don't slip, Miss Williams." "Then why are you still standing here?" He stared at her for a long, agonizing beat, his control fraying at the edges, before turning abruptly and walking out, leaving behind a room heavy with the scent of cedar and a hunger he could no longer hide. The high-resolution scanner hummed in the quiet sanctuary of the archive room, casting a rhythmic blue glow across the heavy glass desk. Amara leaned over her workstation, her brow furrowed as she cross-referenced a late 19th century land registry with a digitized ledger. Something wasn't matching up. The ink on the physical page was uniform, but the thermal layer picked up by her specialized restoration software was displaying an anomaly. A series of faint microscopic alterations embedded directly into the fiber of the parchment. She zoomed in on the high-definition monitor. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't age or degradation. Beneath the surface ink lay an ultra-thin, conductive thread weave, a physical vector for an embedded digital chip. It was sophisticated microtechnology, designed to look like traditional paper grain, masking an active, low-frequency tracking node. And it wasn't old. It was transmitting an encrypted signal in real time, routing every log of Taejun's movement inside his private vault directly to an external server. Whoever placed it here didn't just want to steal secrets. They were mapping his exact physical location, tracking when he entered the sanctuary, how long he stayed, and when his defenses were lowest. The heavy glass doors hissed open behind her. Amara didn't flinch as Taejun's familiar, commanding presence filled the room. His steps were measured, stopping just behind her right shoulder. "You are working late, Miss Williams," he said softly, the deep vibration of his voice sending a subtle shiver down her spine. "The translation can wait until morning." "It's not a translation, Mr. Kang," Amara said, her tone dead serious as she gestured to the glowing screen. "It's a breach." Taejun leaned down, his broad chest nearly brushing against her back as his dark eyes locked onto the glowing blue readouts. The intimate heat of his body was instantly eclipsed by a sudden deadly chill as he processed the technical data. "Explain," he commanded, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "Someone didn't just hack your system from the outside," Amara said, turning slightly to meet his sharp gaze. Their faces were inches apart, the air between them static with newfound danger. "They physically brought this document into your high-security vault. This paper was logged into your private collection 3 days ago, right before the ambush. It's broadcasting your coordinates." Taejun's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his cheek. The realization hit like a physical blow. The document had passed through only 4 hands: his chief archivist, his legal counsel, his top financial advisor, and his second-in-command, Minjai. The threat wasn't outside his walls. It was inside his inner circle. Taejun slowly raised his eyes to meet Amara's, the cold, calculating strategist returning in full force, but mixed with a fierce, protective edge that hadn't been there before. She had just handed him the weapon he needed to save his life, but in doing so, she had stepped directly into the crosshairs of a snake. "Shut the monitor down," Taejun ordered softly, his breath warm against her cheek. "You didn't see this. You tell no one." "They're watching you, Taejun," she whispered, using his name for the very first time. His dark eyes flashed with an unreadable emotion, his control splintering for a fraction of a second before he leaned in even closer. "Then we make sure they don't see you." The air inside the subterranean backup server vault turned thick and heavy as the storm outside hammered Seoul. A deafening crack of thunder shook the floor, and instantly the room dropped into absolute darkness. The primary power grid died, followed by the dull, mechanical click of emergency magnetic locks sealing the heavy vault doors tight. In the pitch-black space, only the faint amber pulse of backup battery indicators cast a dim glow. Amara stood still, listening to the rhythm of her own heartbeat, until she heard the sharp, ragged intake of breath across the room. Taejun was standing near the central mainframe, motionless. The silence was stretched so thin it felt dangerous. "The atmospheric seals are automated," Taejun rasped, his voice strangely thin, stripped of its usual iron authority. "It will take 30 minutes for the override protocol to cycle." Amara stepped carefully toward him through the dim amber shadows. As her eyes adjusted, she saw his hands braced against the metal server rack. His knuckles were white, his frame stiffened, as if fighting an invisible, crushing weight. "Taejun?" she asked softly. "Don't," he muttered, his breath coming faster now, shallow and tight. "Stay where you are." Instead, Amara took the final step, closing the space between them. She reached out, placing her palm gently over his tight, trembling fist. Taejun flinched, a low groan catching in his throat, but he didn't pull away. The contact grounded him instantly, the wild panic in his eyes beginning to quiet under the steady warmth of her hand. "It's not the pain," he whispered into the dark, his voice raw, confessing a truth he had buried deeper than his fortune. "It's the noise." Amara stayed silent, her thumb lightly tracing the back of his hand, encouraging him to continue. "When people touch me," Taejun confessed, his dark gaze locking onto hers with a desperate intensity, "it is always an exchange, a transaction, a weapon, a demand for power, for money, for mercy. Every human hand that has touched me since I was a child carried a silent price tag. The sensation became louder than words, a constant suffocating noise of what they wanted to take from me." He slowly turned his hand beneath hers, lacing his long fingers through hers for the very first time. His grip was firm, almost possessive, yet completely vulnerable. "Your hand is quiet, Amara," he whispered, leaning down until his forehead rested against hers in the dim amber light. "There is no demand in you, no price. It's the only time my mind goes silent." The confession hung between them, heavy and profound. The terrifying titan of Seoul wasn't afraid of physical touch. He was starved for sincerity in a world where everything was bought and sold. Amara squeezed his hand, her heart aching for the solitary burden he carried. "I'm not going anywhere, Taejun." When the vault locks finally clicked open and the emergency lights flooded the room, neither of them moved to pull away. The glass-walled executive foyer was packed with board members and security personnel following the sudden power grid failure. Taejun moved through the crowd, like a king navigating a chessboard, his expression restored to its cold granite perfection. Amara walked 2 steps behind him, carrying the encrypted ledger files, keeping her expression completely neutral, despite the lingering electricity of what had transpired in the dark server vault. Standing near the perimeter was Director Han Chai-won, a formidable, razor-sharp woman whose family controlled 30% of the hotel empire's corporate shares. Her eyes, cool and calculating, tracked Taejeon's every breath. She had spent a decade searching for a hairline fracture in his impenetrable armor, waiting for the single mistake that would allow her to strip him of his executive control. As Taejeon paused to address a senior vice president, a disgruntled former contractor suddenly broke through the security cordon. The man was furious, shouting incoherently about a terminated contract, his arms swinging wildly as he lunged forward toward the group. The disruption happened in a fraction of a second. Security guards reacted, but Taejeon moved faster. He didn't move to protect himself. He didn't cover his chief of security or guard his own exposed side. In a single fluid motion of pure instinct, Taejeon pivoted, sweeping his arm backward to shield Amara. He placed his tall, broad frame entirely between her and the unstable intruder, his hand briefly touching the small of her back to press her safely behind him. His body formed an absolute human wall, his dark eyes instantly turning lethal as he glared down the threat until security tackled the man to the granite floor. It was over in 3 seconds. To the panicking executives, it looked like a quick reaction to an unpredictable threat. But Chae-won saw it. She stood frozen near the marble pillars, her sharp eyes widening in silent, breathless revelation. She had watched Taejeon survive political ambushes, public scandals, and violent rivalries without ever losing his composure or risking his physical person for another human being. He was a man who considered non-contact a sacred law. Yet without a second thought, he had thrown himself into harm's way for a quiet American archivist. A slow, predatory smile touched Chae-won's lips. The untouchable billionaire didn't just have an archivist working in his private quarters. He had a weakness, a living, breathing human target that rendered all his power, his money, and his terror completely useless. Taejeon slowly lowered his arm, his shoulders rigid as he glanced back at Amara over his shoulder. "Are you unhurt?" he asked softly, his voice dropping below the ambient noise of the crowd, completely indifferent to the chaos around them. "I'm fine," Amara replied, her eyes meeting his with steady warmth. Across the foyer, Chae-won pulled out her secure phone, her eyes locked on Amara's back, as she typed a single message to her hidden operatives. "Find out everything about the girl." The shrill, piercing alarm of an emergency security breach shattered the morning silence of the private residence. Amara stood in the center of the vault office, her tablet glowing an ominous, flashing red on the oak desk. Before she could touch the screen, the heavy double doors were thrown open with violence. Min-jae marched into the room, flanked by 4 heavily armed tactical guards. His face was pale with anger, his sidearm unholstered. Behind them walked Taejeon, his expression an unreadable mask of ice, though his dark eyes locked onto Amara with a sudden suffocating intensity. "Step away from the device, Miss Williams," Min-jae commanded, his voice tight and trembling with suppressed rage. "Do not move." "What is happening?" Amara asked calmly, refusing to flinch as the guards fanned out, surrounding her position. 10 minutes ago, sensitive financial ledgers and internal routing codes for Mr. Kang's entire offshore network were broadcast to the Financial Intelligence Agency, Min-jae said, his breath hitching. "The origin signature was traced directly to your personal secure encrypted tablet. The data packet contained your private access clearance." "That's impossible," Amara said, her eyes shifting to Taejeon. "I haven't accessed those ledgers since I flagged the micro-tracker yesterday. Someone used my clearance." "She is a plant, sir," Min-jae snapped, turning frantically to Taejeon. "She infiltrated the archival team, gained your trust, and used the breach in the server room as cover to download the vault keys. Director Chae-won's faction is already calling for a board vote to strip your executive powers. We must arrest her immediately and hand her over to our private security team for interrogation." The word interrogation hung heavy in the air, a death sentence in Taejeon's violent, hidden world, Silence descended upon the room, thick and suffocating. All eyes turned to Taejon. The evidence was absolute, undeniable, and catastrophic. Any leader in his position would have ordered her executed on the spot to save his empire. Taejon slowly stepped past the armed guards, positioning his tall frame directly between Min Jae's drawn weapon and Amara. His dark gaze never left her face, searching her steady, unblinking eyes. He saw no fear, no guilt, only the same quiet truth that had silenced his mind in the dark. "Lower your weapon, Min Jae," Taejun ordered softly. Min Jae gasped. "Sir, she has destroyed your standing with the board. If you don't authorize her arrest, the lieutenants will view it as treason. They will think you have lost your mind." "I said..." Taejun's voice dropped to a lethal, bone-chilling whisper that made even the tactical guards freeze. "Lower your weapon. She stays with me. You are burning down everything you built for a woman you met 3 weeks ago," Min Jae yelled, breaking professional protocol for the first time in his career. "Then let it burn," Taejun replied coldly, taking Amara's hand in front of every armed man in the room, making his choice absolute. The heavy silence of Taejun's private quarters felt heavier than any threat. Amara stood near the glass wall, watching the rain slick the dark skyline of Seoul. Downstairs, the empire was fracturing. His lieutenants were mutinying. Chaewon board members were sharpening their knives, and every decision Taejun made was compromised by a single variable: her. He had chosen her over his own survival. He had stared down his armed security team and told them to let his life's work burn before letting anyone lay a hand on her. That wasn't strength. It was suicide. Amara looked down at the physical archival contract resting on the mahogany desk. She grabbed a fountain pen, her fingers steady, despite the ache in her chest, and signed her name across the bottom under a single word: resignation. She didn't write a dramatic farewell. She didn't leave a trail of tear-stained notes. She simply pulled up her personal phone, booked a one-way ticket to Atlanta, departing at midnight, and packed her single suitcase. She knew Taejun's strength lay in his absolute, untouchable focus. As long as she was in his world, he was vulnerable. Chaewon would use her, frame her, or kill her just to make him bleed. The heavy oak doors clicked open and Taejun walked in. He had discarded his suit jacket, his dark hair slightly disheveled, looking like a king fighting a war on 10 different fronts. Yet the second his dark eyes met hers, the exhaustion vanished, replaced by that intense protective warmth he reserved only for her. "The board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning," Taejun said, his voice deep and gravelly as he stepped into her space. "My legal team is isolating the leak source. You are safe." Amara didn't step back, but she didn't step toward him either. She simply pointed to the paper on the desk. Taejun's gaze fell onto the document. The color drained from his face. The cold, impenetrable marble mask fractured instantly. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, desperate register. "It's my departure." "Taejun," Amara said softly, her eyes holding his with unwavering clarity. "You are fighting a war against your own inner circle, and you're doing it with a target painted on your chest because of me. You can't protect your legacy if you're constantly watching my back." "I don't care about the legacy," he rasped, taking a fast step forward, his broad hands hovering inches from her face, fighting every instinct to grab her and hold her pinned to his side. "I care about this." "I know," Amara whispered, leaning up to gently press her lips against his cheek, a brief, burning contact that made him shudder. "And that is why I have to leave." She picked up her bag and walked past him, leaving the most powerful, feared man in Seoul standing completely alone in his empty glass tower, holding a piece of paper that proved the only thing he couldn't control was the woman who had saved him. The high-altitude boardroom of Taejun Tower was a ruthless tribunal of suits and silences. At the head of the polished obsidian table, Director Han Chae-won sat with an air of absolute victory, flanked by an emergency quorum of board members and corporate counsel. Projected on the wall behind her were the leaked security logs and the fabricated digital paper trail framing Amara Williams for high-level industrial espionage. "The evidence is unequivocal," Chae-won announced, her voice echoing through the sterile glass hall. "Kang Tae-jun's personal breach of protocol has compromised our entire infrastructure. By harboring the operative who stole our proprietary codes, he has proven himself emotionally unfit to lead. We move to strip him of executive authority immediately." Down the table, Tae-jun sat motionless. He looked impeccably tailored, his broad posture commanding, yet he hadn't glanced at a single document presented against him. His dark eyes were fixed on the silver watch resting against his left wrist. 11:15. Her flight back to Atlanta departed in 45 minutes. His legal team leaned in, frantically whispering a complex counter-strategy to dismantle Chae-won's digital evidence. They had spent 12 hours building an airtight defense that would preserve his multi-billion-dollar empire and crush the rebellion once and for all. All he had to do was speak. All he had to do was fight for his crown. Tae-jun slowly pushed his chair back. The heavy mahogany scraped against the floor, instantly killing the room's chatter. "Mr. Kang?" His chief legal counsel stammered, looking up in panic. "Your rebuttal. We have the floor." Tae-jun didn't offer a rebuttal. He didn't offer a single word of defense. He adjusted his cuffs, stood tall, and looked down at Chae-won with a gaze so terrifyingly hollow it made the woman's smug expression freeze. "Take the empire," Tae-jun said, his low, gravelly voice cutting through the silent room like a blade. "Keep the shares, take the titles, burn the rest to the ground." Without waiting for a response, he turned his back on the board of directors, pushed through the heavy double doors, and walked away from everything he had spent a lifetime building. Min-jae was waiting at the private elevator bank, looking pale and desperate. "Sir, if you leave this room, the board will finalize the vote within minutes. You lose control of everything." "Get the car," Tae-jun commanded, his stride fast and unyielding as his dark eyes locked onto the horizon. "We're going to Incheon International." 20 minutes later, his matte black SUV tore through the terminal drop-off zone, shattering every traffic law in Seoul. Tae-jun threw open the door before the vehicle had even fully stopped, sweeping through the crowded terminal like a tidal wave. Security guards moved out of his path. Travelers scattered before his towering frame. He ignored the flashing departure boards, the whispering crowds, and the destruction of his corporate throne. He didn't care about the money. He didn't care about the power. He only cared about the woman who had taught his guarded heart how to feel. The international departure terminal of Incheon Airport was a sea of movement, but for Tae-jun, the entire world narrowed down to a single silhouette standing near Gate 14. Amara turned, her boarding pass held loosely in her hand, as a sudden stillness rippled through the crowded concourse. Tae-jun was walking toward her. He had discarded his tie, his pristine black suit jacket unbuttoned, his dark hair falling slightly across his forehead. He looked entirely stripped of the terrifying billionaire facade, vulnerable, breathless, and utterly unbothered by the dozens of smartphones instantly rising to film the most guarded man in Korea chasing a woman through an airport. Amara froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Tae-jun." "The board meeting. What are you doing here?" "I gave them the empire," Tae-jun said, his deep, gravelly voice carrying across the quieted terminal. He stopped directly in front of her, closing the distance completely. He didn't care about the cameras, the flashing lights, or the inevitable news headlines that would shatter his public anonymity by morning. "You what?" Amara whispered, her eyes widening in disbelief. "You walked away." It wasn't a sacrifice, he murmured. Stepping so close, his broad chest touched hers. In front of hundreds of onlookers, the man who had spent a lifetime enforcing a lethal non-contact mandate slowly reached out. His large, warm hand cupped her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. It was an easy choice. My empire was built on fear and cold stone. It means nothing without the only person who made me feel human. Amara gasped as his touch grounded her, her own hand rising to cover his. They will try to ruin you. They can't ruin a man who has nothing left to hide. Taejon replied, a faint, rare smile breaking across his sharp features. A look of absolute, terrifying freedom. He didn't use violence, mafia leverage, or subterranean threats to destroy Chaewon's coup. By stepping into the light, publicly claiming Amara, and exposing the corruption within his own board, during a live, unscripted press statement right from the terminal, Taejon completely dismantled his rival's leverage. The stock market didn't collapse. It rallied behind his unprecedented honesty. Within 48 hours, Chaewon's faction was forced into bankruptcy, exposed by the very public scrutiny she had tried to weaponize. Standing together on the private balcony of his residence a week later, overlooking a Seoul that no longer terrified him, Taejon wrapped his arms around Amara from behind, resting his chin softly against her shoulder. He didn't need the shadow world or the rigid glass walls to rule. He had rebuilt his life on his own terms. Stronger, unyielding, and completely exposed to the warmth of the woman who had taught the most feared man in Seoul what it felt like to be loved.